everyone, welcome back to the National Public Speaking Competition, the finals.
We would like to thank our sponsors once again. Fisher E-Center, Mivnet Education, Curtea Veche, Books Express, Uniscan, Europe Direct, Bucharest, Excellent English Education, Pearson, and Origo.
And now, before inviting Miss Ella and Miss Catalina on the stage, I would like to congratulate all of you for coming here today and having the courage to face what's coming next. Miss Ella, would you please come on the stage?
Okay, what's coming next is not exactly the hounds of Satan after you, so I would relax. It's not that much different from yesterday, but yes, I'm not going to go into a long speech as yesterday, since you've all heard that. But yes, congratulations to our 10 finalists today. Well done for coming here and for being here and for basically being committed to improving yourself, because I find that these extracurricular activities that you have do take commitment in terms of time that you spend preparing for them and choosing them. And I do know, like, everybody has a pretty busy workload with school and family time and friends. So I do find it that when people of all ages have these extracurricular activities, they mainly do it because they want to improve themselves and they want to improve their skills, regardless whether it's public speaking or sports or arts and crafts or whatever it is that you do. That's a commitment to yourself to improve so that you can later on thrive. So, well done for choosing to do this and investing your time into doing this. I would also like, before we get started, to introduce the panel of adjudicators for today so that you know who will be doing this. We are going to have myself, Ella Nicolae, so president of the ESU. I'm going to be one of the adjudicators today. Yeah, so the finals is the moment where I actually get to listen to speeches. The first moment, because the semifinals I just run around. Then we have Kendall Peet, head of the International British School of Bucharest, who has been with the finals of the public speaking competition for about, I think, at least 10 years now. So we're very grateful for the support. We also have Cristina Rusu from Emil Racovița National College in Cluj. She's also the regional organizer for the Center, Transylvania region, and also the coordinating teacher for the winner of the public speaking competition last year, who also made it all the way to the grand final in London. So fingers crossed that we get that again. We hope so. And we also have two adjudicators from ICHB with us today. We have Irina. Thank you very much. And we also have Eliza. So thank you very much. So there will be 5 of us, and we're looking forward to hearing your speeches. And I'm just gonna let Catalina say a few words, and then we'll get started. Thank you very much.
Hello. Yesterday we really had a beautiful day. Not just literally because it was sunny, but still I see sun outside now. But it was a beautiful day, and 100 beautiful minds coming and presenting their speeches. Such a mind-boggling moment. But while I'm here, I would like to one more time congratulate all these beautiful kids, our ESU ICHB volunteers that stood us in good stead yesterday and also today. Let's clap our hands. Bravo! As I said yesterday, I'm going to say it again. Let's rock it. And let's make it to the top, and maybe a Romanian person will basically win, even there in London. All right, good luck all. Good luck.
And now, we would like to introduce you, your timekeeper. This is Teresa. Please raise your hand.
We'll also be introducing the speakers.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, come on stage. Yeah.
Don't be shy.
Okay, so we first have Beldiman Tudor. Then we will have Videaua Luca Ștefan. Afterwards, Nin Alexandra Cristina. Kirila Matei. Grecu Daria. Grosu Alessia Miruna. Hanganu Tudor Ioan. Margineanu Marius Andrei. Matei Marc. And Paul Beatrice.
Alright, so Teresa, your place. Alright, okay, and let's start, right?
Break a leg, everyone. Good luck. Alright. Still 1 second.
I want to start off by saying that I found it very difficult to properly convey the ideas that I had in my head in the allotted time. There is so much to say about this subject, and 5 minutes barely allows us to scratch the surface, but I shall make an attempt. So, international relations are too important to be left for only the governments to handle, meaning we, the people, must make a concerted effort to try and maintain some sort of a positive relation between ourselves and our neighboring nations. Now, this sounds like a very basic and easily understood idea, but the more time and research you put into actually figuring out how to go about this, it becomes heavily apparent that it is not so simple. To put it simply, language barriers, cultural barriers, as well as physical barriers, such as border crossings that take hours to pass through, discourage a person from leaving the comfort that they find in the familiarity of their home nation. After all, how does a person that isn't from your country, doesn't speak the same language, and doesn't participate in the same cultural traditions as you, relate in any way to your person? This is already an incredibly difficult situation to deal with, but compounded on top of all of that is the political landscape that the respective citizens of different nations find themselves in. By this, I mean that far-right, hyper-nationalist political parties have it in their interest to not only completely abandon the idea of international friendliness, but to actually sow hatred and disparity between their voter base and any foreigners. It is a textbook technique used by these types of people, and it is terrifyingly effective. A very good example from history is the Nazi regime in Germany and the fascist regime in Italy back in the 1930s and 40s respectively. But even nowadays, we can observe the rise of far-right populist political parties all over the globe. We have Fidesz in Hungary and PIS in Poland, to name a couple. So what do we do then? How does one go about fixing these seemingly impossible issues, something that doesn't even seem that important to begin with? I can't guarantee that I've 100% figured it out, but I will try to attempt to suggest a possible solution. Allow me to pivot the conversation a little bit to education. I promise it'll tie back into the main subject. Education and all that it entails forms the foundation of, if not the entirety of a nation, at least the majority of it, and goes on to guide the people that are going to become tax-paying adults and that are going to go on to vote. Does it not make sense then to ensure that these people have some semblance of political literacy, regardless of their social status or the amount of their wealth? According to what Carol John Ulliner wrote in the International Encyclopedia of the Social and Behavioral Sciences, quote, substantial cross-national data have shown that wealthier, better educated people have participate in politics at higher rates than the less advantaged. Now, you don't need me to stand here to tell you that it's bad to be prejudiced against poor people from our society and that we need to ensure that they have equal opportunities to participate in politics. That much is obvious. But we're talking about more than just political participation. The entire basis of international relations maintained by the citizens of a nation rather than the government resides in not only political literacy and education, but also in the ability of a person being able to disregard their own political biases for the perceived greater good. So it's not enough to go up to a person and tell them, here's how the government of your country works. Have fun. You have to teach these people ways by which they can spot out blatantly racist and xenophobic rhetorics used by political parties that only wish to score a quick vote. This does entail a huge shift in the internal politics of a nation and also a better focus on helping the less advantaged from our society, which on a large scale I realize is highly unlikely in the current political climate. But I do believe I'm approaching the end of my time here, so I'll quickly end off with this. As much focus as I place on the importance of education and political literacy, none of these changes are possible if we don't do something about it ourselves today. Nobody's going to wake up tomorrow morning thinking that they want to learn about politics. We have to go and teach people ourselves and be engaged in our local politics. So please, go vote if and when you're old enough to do so. Talk to your friends, engage in your local politics, and if nothing else, please try to better educate yourself. Thank you. Are there still questions? Oh.
What brings about intolerance from the right is a form of conditioning that is applied to the populace. Now, education, as far as we have developed it in school systems all around the world, is still another form of conditioning. So at most, it is a band-aid fix. Do you agree with this?
I don't think that the notion of a band-aid fix is in its entirety a bad thing. Obviously, a band-aid fix entails that it is temporary and relatively inefficient, but I obviously think that we need to start somewhere. And there's no way to build a base to go and try to teach people how to be more tolerant, I should say. So I agree with the statement that it is a band-aid fix, but I don't think that it is inefficient.
How do we navigate the seas of misinformation, especially entailing the topic of politics?
I suppose that it is quite difficult. I think a lot more people that are way smarter than me have come up with solutions somewhat to this. Obviously, just ensuring that people, not necessarily regulating the news, but ensuring that people get their news from as many as different sources, and also ensuring that the sources are as objective as you can feasibly do it, right? You can't have somebody who's 100% objective, but just diversifying the amount of sources for your information, I think, is the solution here.
So, in your case, obviously, since you approach a topic as this, you do have some political literacy. How did you achieve this? By yourself? Was it done by school?
I was just personally interested in it. I'm a very big fan of history. I study it a lot, read a lot of research papers and documents, and you can't really approach history without approaching the more political side of it. And when I did that, I realized that modern politics is also more important than things that happened in the past. And I just went down the rabbit hole of figuring out how my government works. Because, for example, like at my high school, despite my teacher's best efforts, I didn't really understand how the government works, how elections work. I didn't even know how long the mandate of our president is for up until like last year. So it was this process of me going, wow, I really don't know anything about this, and then deciding to do something about it.
What's the point in having political literacy if the options available don't appear to differentiate to the person voting? So where A is as bad as B, so partial power corrupts partially, total power corrupts totally, so it really doesn't matter who's in government, the outcome is likely to be the same.
I think that political literacy in this case helps with observing the fact that, wow, these people, I'm just choosing the lesser evil of two very bad people that should not be anywhere near the position of leadership that they're trying to get. Having that political literacy, that skill to be able to observe that, aids a citizen in being engaged in protests and actually attempting to change that via protests and political movements that are outside the government. It also, the whole point of education and political literacy will, although this would take a couple decades, but it will, with time, make the lesser politicians, I suppose, obsolete. So just by natural selections, they will disappear because better people will crop up.
Are there any questions left? Then I guess thank you.
Before I begin, I should like to say a few words. I am not here to be listened to. I am not here to be followed. The only thing that I ask is that you try to understand what I want to tell you and to understand me and where I'm coming from. Since the beginning of time, there has been conflict among the human race, and nations, governments, they are just glorified tribalism. And since we have already defined that man has been in conflict with other men, with himself, with ideas, he has always sought out something to be different, something to part into two different halves. Nations, then, ergo, are at war with other nations, are in conflict with other nations. Ideologies are at war with other ideologies. And you may pick whichever war, conflict in history you may wish to think of. And when you think of it, you may say to yourselves, well, what a brutal thing it is. But as Mark Twain said, that's not a brutal thing, but a human thing instead. And you should not insult brutes by such an awful misuse of the word. So when animals, beasts, and brutes do cruel things, apparently cruel things, these are not cruel. When a wolf hunts a doe, for him it is not wrong. For it there is no such thing as wrong. And the wolf does not do so out of a desire to inflict pain, and does not take pleasure out of inflicting it. Only men do that. Now, this is a horrid thing to be aware of, that our entire history is an endless list of treacheries and horrible drenchings of the earth with infant blood. And you may lose heart. I lose heart sometimes when I wake up and I can't even seem to make sense of where to start with fixing it. But I think that beyond anything else, the most important part of it is to be aware, to brutally be aware of our own prejudices, our own authorities, our own churches, new and old, to brutally see them for what they are, and in this state of attention, to finally free ourselves of it. You may see people who will come to you and will claim to have a solution, but these people you cannot depend on. You're not free if your liberty depends on somebody else. Government officials, by the use of propaganda, will come up to you and will enchant you with their lies. And then these same people who would shut the door in your face, who would feel defiled if you touched them, who talk to you in the language of master to slave and are answered in the language of slave to master, even though in your secret hearts you detest them. You know that this is not right. But do you see yourselves in this position when you see something and you accuse it? This is not right. Pope John the 23rd in 1963, so 60 years ago, implemented a project, his brainchild, which was called Pacem in Terris, which was Catholic rhetoric for peace on earth. 60 years after, we still have war. Because in all the years that humanity has existed,
We have never had a radical psychological change, and thus our past morphs into our present, which propagates into the future. You may think of tomorrow as much as you'd like. You can stretch it out for 1,000 years. It will still be the same tomorrow that you and I will live the next day. Because we never change. It may seem impossible, but all it takes is one step. The first step, which is also the last step. Because what brings understanding is love. And to have love means to have compassion for all things, not for just the people we cohabit with on a day-to-day basis, not just for ourselves, but to abandon all meaningless comparison, because comparison is meaningless. But from school, we're taught to compare. I am better than you, you are better than me, you are more beautiful than me, and so on. And to begin to understand who you actually are beyond all words, because words, they do not define anything. Think of it. A mountain is not a mountain just because we call it that. If we called it some other word, montagne like the French do, it would still be a mountain. So to begin to understand what you are, you have to abandon all words. You have to look inward and see your prejudice.
Stop.
The end. Thank you. Questions? Have any? Yes? So, do we have any questions?
Are there any questions?
So the timekeeper will help you with the questions. It's
Yeah.
okay.
How can you promote the ideals of compassion to people who have no idea what they are?
I cannot promote them. This is not my business. What I am here to do is just have a conversation with you. I will not go out and seek as many people as I can. You know, when you start speaking, people, those who understand will listen. It's not something that should be sought out, because the moment you seek it out, that's the moment that it will not happen. You know, the seeking pleasure above all else will always guarantee that you never seek it, because this ideal that something should be accomplished is the root of it. This endless game of possession is what has caused us to be here today. So no, I cannot promote it. Promotion is not a word that I would ever use, because it is not mine. I have no monopoly over it. It is not mine. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Don't you think that sometimes conflicts, misunderstandings, comparison, and even criticism is required in order to achieve progress?
No, because it is not progress. It is simply a prejudiced image, a face that is crafted through words, and it is not who you are as a person. It is who you've been taught to be. It's who you think you are. But who you think you are is not who you actually are. It's just an endless game of words. So, for example, let me tell you how little words can do. When there were once two monks who sat by the sea, and one of them told the other, "I have achieved enlightenment, and I'm holding it here in my hand, like the scripture says." And the other said, "Do you see the sea?" "Yes." "If you go there and cusp water in your hands, is that water the sea?" "No." "Can you hold the wind?" "No." "Can you hold the earth?" "No." So what are you holding in words and definitions of who you are? I hope that answers your question.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Well, a main element of your thesis is the evil, violent nature of humans. However, we still have a moral compass. How can you explain that?
But it is not the evil nature of humans. It is merely inattention that has led to this. The mind is always in an endless soliloquy with itself. This is not human nature. This is simply how should I say it? It's simply the result of thousands of years of conditioning. Conditioning we have applied to ourselves, but this is not our nature. It's not something that we are bound to forever. Our nature is mortal. We die and we live. That is not something that we can be free of, but this we can be free of. We can be free from the known.
Yeah?
Why would we condition ourselves in the first place?
Because people, for one reason or another, are enamored by earthly things. They want to have, just look at the way we phrase it. I want love. I want to be loved. I want to have power, status, success. But all these things are childish. It is merely because it is simple. It's simpler to hide yourself behind walls of fear and words than to brutally and honestly die to every second that you live and so become endless. I hope you understand what I want to say.
Any more questions?
How are the people that live in totalitarian states with fundamentally controlled perspectives supposed to realize their own prejudice and fight against it?
How are they supposed to? Well, it all comes down to one thing. Merely, all it takes is a second. It's not something that I have control over or you have control over. What it all comes down to is each and every one of us, our own responsibility, our own sensibility towards things. But let me tell you, if by supposing that we have a duty to free these people, to go there and say, no, this is the end of your regime, we will only cause another war down the line, we will cause another conflict. You cannot answer violence with violence, you cannot change something through the outside, you can only hope and wish that it does come from the inside. And all that I ask and all that I think can be done is to have sensibility, to have tears for things, as I don't know, Virgil would say, for this world, and to simply award each other the patience, and if you come in contact with one of these people, to simply look at them without prejudice, to not look at them as monsters or victims, to simply see them for what they are in front of you. Just that. I hope that answers your question.
Any more questions? Yeah.
So do you think peace is always the solution, or is sometimes war justifiable?
War is never justifiable. There is never a single instance where it is justifiable to take another person's life. You may think, well, self-defense. But what is a death will still occur. So it is not justifiable. This attachment to our own existence is why we have been here. And it might sound disparaging, but it is the only solution to ever achieving a state in which we are not bound by conditioning, to be free completely of everything that is the self. That is this pursuit of things, of progress, of possession.
Thank you. So, next up we have...
Thank you. Thank you.
Next up we have Bilanin Alexandra Cristina.
It is undeniable that we live in a time of crisis. With the threat of global warming looming overhead, worldwide economic collapse, and the war that comes with the increasingly plausible hazard of nuclear retaliation, the world seems to be hanging in a constant state of terror and uncertainty. It's during these times that we experience strong feelings of hopelessness and alienation. Propaganda spewed by news outlets is contradictory, all showing different, but equally narrow, angles of the same event. This has shaped a society easily puppeteered with strings made up of clever wordplay and jargon unintelligible to the regular person. However, the silver lining is one not many can see, which is that truly democratic nations irrefutably run on consensus, but also pride themselves on freedom of speech and self-expression, which means, at least to a greater extent than in other regimes, government non-intervention in the news cycles and media. Let's take, for example, the differences between Russian and Western propaganda, which have become especially apparent since the invasion of Ukraine. While it's true that propaganda exists on both sides, those of us who live in democratic nations have access to a much wider range of information, true
and false from a much wider range of sources than those who live in the increasingly totalitarian regime that is the Russian Federation. Citizens of the latter have to rely on information regarding the war, politics, even the outside world, coming from government-approved, pro-regime news outlets and television programs. It is unfortunate, though, that even independent news agencies tend to have political biases or lean one way or the other on the political scale. Perhaps the most well-known examples are the two biggest American news channels, CNN, which is Democratic, and Fox News, which is Republican. The rise of biases in what was supposed to be a profession based on facts and neutrality is what, in my opinion, brought about the increase in fake news. Oftentimes we have to deal with the inconvenience of doing our own research when it comes to the important matters of the world, so as to avoid getting persuaded by the lies of one party or another. The rise of biases, as I've said, should be seen, however, as a privilege. Because not only does it help us appreciate the freedom we have been granted, but also the fact that for better or worse, even those who are less educated and consequently easily misinformed have the right to express their opinion, which wouldn't have been the case in a different time period or regime. I know what you might be thinking, and for good reason. How can we spot the truth in a sea of lies and biases? And how can we stay afloat in an era of distrust and misinformation? Well, in my opinion, the solution to this modern dilemma comes in the form of making connections. Power is so often found in numbers, and connecting with people of different cultures and nationalities can help satisfy not only our innate need for socialization, but also the desire to keep ourselves informed about the world we live in. And this is where, ladies and gentlemen, non-governmental organizations, NGOs for short, come into play. Not only can their increasing popularity, but just their mere existence be explained by the aforementioned desire for a close-knit global community. But what are NGOs really? Simply put, there are groups of people who have come together from all around the world in order to fight together for a common goal, such as equal rights for women, members of marginalized groups such as the LGBTQ+ community, helping war refugees, and other instances of humanitarian crises. Although their activity is, as their name entails, independent from the government, they have played the primary role in focusing the attention of the international community on human rights issues by essentially monitoring the acts of governments and forcing them to act in accordance with human rights principles. Cure Violence Global, for example, is an organization that was established in the year 2000 by Gary Slatkin as a way to fight against the increase of violence in society. Their usage of evidence-based public health epidemic reversal strategies has proven to be the most effective way of dealing with violent crime in society. In conclusion, although the importance of what governments represent is irrefutable, as without them we wouldn't live in the mostly lawful and orderly societies that we do, we, as the people they govern, have an obligation to keep the people in power in check. Remember that throughout history, it wasn't the government who spoke up against the injustices done to the common folk, but it was us, the people themselves, who had to rise up and be their own voice. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? Yeah?
You spoke about the fact that even less educated people are able to share their opinions, even if they can be easily misinformed. Do you think that people should be allowed to promote ideals that may be hateful or dangerous to society?
I think there's a difference between being uneducated and being harmful. I believe that everyone has the right to express their opinion. Obviously, there is, again, a difference between free speech. You are allowed to say anything you want, but there should be consequences, obviously, for when you're inciting violence or harmful ideologies such as Nazism, for example. Yeah?
You praise democratic ideals, which is good, but we should not venerate states or nations or any government for that matter of fact, because democratic governments have done covert operations in other countries and are responsible for just as equally heinous crimes. Let's not forget that America nuclearly bombed
You have to
Japan.
ask a question.
Yes, I'll get to it in just a second.
Make
So
it a
do you
brief
think?
question.
So do you think that you would have to be careful not to praise too much and venerate ideals because it may get harmful?
Well, definitely we shouldn't praise ideas that are harmful, but out of all of the political ideologies and all of the different political systems, democracy is the best one. That is undeniable, because by definition, democracy is the politics of the people, right? So essentially, the people elect a representative. The people speak. The people have a voice in democracy, which isn't the case for other regimes.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay.
Would you rather be part of a political party or an NGO?
That is a very good question, actually. Well, I think that these two should work together. I would like to be part of an NGO that sort of is also that is also in politics. That's what I'm trying to say. I believe that these two should cooperate, because essentially NGOs are groups of people who want to do better in society, and politicians are people who were elected by society to rule them. So I think that these two should go hand in hand.
Thank you. Any more questions? No. Okay. Next up we have Kirila Matei.
Aristocracy. In Greek, it means power or rule of the best. Has this word lost its original meaning? Can we truly say that today's governments are, or at least are close to, the very best their nations have to offer? Can we trust these governments with the important task of ruling? Well, in this speech entitled The Butterfly Effect and International Politics, I seek to answer a specialized case of this question, namely whether international politics can be left solely to government. One point of view on this matter would be that indeed international politics are extremely important, far beyond anything a government should be responsible for. An argument for this point of view would be the memory of a nation. That is, how an event often has long-lasting consequences, maybe even millennia after the event itself. If I were to give an example of such a situation, the splitting of the Carolingian Empire would be a prime candidate. To briefly summarize, due to inheritance laws at the time, the Carolingian Empire was split between the three sons of the late emperor. Two of the successor states, which would later become France and the Holy Roman Empire, that is, Germany, waged war upon each other. This led to a kind of enmity between the French and German peoples, which in turn resulted in many other conflicts. The War of the Spanish Succession, the 30 Years' War, or World War I, to name but a few. So, as we can see from this example, actions taken at an international scale will have wide-reaching repercussions. A counter-argument would be that, after all, governments are legitimate, or at least have the power to rule, and as such should be entitled to represent a nation in international affairs. If that is not enough to grant them sufficient responsibility, then who is worthy of such a task? Well, while both sides of this debate have powerful arguments in their favor, I would like to take a step back and analyze the question itself. Are international politics that important? Well, I believe the idea that governments are solely or even just predominantly responsible for international politics to be somewhat erroneous, since there is a multitude of factors that contribute to international relations, from culture and trade to personal whims and religion. All of these agents realize a veritable butterfly effect, government intervention being just one of the many factors that lead to the end result. An example of a factor outside of government playing a pivotal role in an international event would be the Great Schism, or the division of the Roman Empire. A major factor for both being the language barrier between the Greek-speaking East and Latin-speaking West. Another example comes to us not from history, but from literature. I am talking about Isaac Asimov's foundation, in which the eponymous state subjugates neighboring powers through the usage of independent merchants, who, through trade, subtly create a dependency on foundation commercial goods. Finally, there are countless examples of butterfly effects throughout history. However, the one I would like to draw your attention to is the First Opium War. Started due to trade restrictions and a few diplomatic blunders caused by cultural differences, it utterly humiliated China, leading to the eventual collapse of the reigning dynasty and the rise of a somewhat short-lived republic. So, as can be asserted from all these examples, international politics cannot be simply reduced to interactions between governments, seemingly being shaped by the proverb for want of a name. So, to conclude, while both sides of this debate have countless and powerful arguments in their favor, the question itself is rather imprecise and limiting, the notion of importance being somewhat vague, while the idea that governments are solely or even just predominantly responsible for international politics being somewhat obtuse. Of course, this should not exonerate government from responsibility. However, I believe it is important that we recognize the sheer chaos of history.
Do we have any questions? Any questions? Yeah?
Do you think that just knowing history is enough to prevent it from happening again?
Absolutely not. I personally subscribe to the philosophy of statistical determinism. That is, history will repeat itself no matter how well we learn it, since humans will act in certain ways that are definitely predictable. While studying history could grant us a greater understanding of the events that are happening right now and will happen in the future, humans are condemned to repeat the same mistakes and the same successes that they have always been.
Yeah.
Do you think that even though, in your eyes, history is going to repeat itself, do you think we shouldn't try to at least stop the bad things from history from repeating again?
Well, yes, we definitely should try, and that is to some degree why we study history. However, we acquire a greater understanding of the events that are happening through history. However, even if we try to, let's say, repair, I don't think that's the right word, but anyway, if we repair the current, let's say, failures of today, we still are condemned to do other mistakes or repair them in ways that they have already been repaired. And even if they are, we find a new way, this new way will be found in the future again and again and again. I would say there are some laws that govern history, just like, to shamelessly steal a metaphor from Isaac Asimov, but imagine humans are particles of gas, and the entirety of humanity is a mass of gas. The particles will behave unpredictably, however, the entirety of the gas will behave in certain ways.
Okay.
Yes.
So, since relations between nations are too important to be left to governments alone, as the topic of the competition is, then what else should come into play?
I'm afraid I don't understand the question. What do you mean by what else?
Who else?
Well,
Who or what?
my thesis is well, first of all, of course, NGOs, and I personally believe that every person is an accidental ambassador of their own nation. Every single interaction we have, not just with other people, but with people in our nation, with people in other nations, but with people in our nation as well, will have eventually a result in international relations. So I would say that government should be the main political force in international relations. However, not all blame and responsibility can be thrown upon them.
Any questions? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up we have Greco Daria. Please wait 1 second.
I'm not a politician. I'm just a storyteller. And the stories I'm going to share with you are going to be a lot more than just good or bad people, heroes or villains, truths or lies. Alexander Betts, a British social scientist whom I consider a fantastic storyteller, is someone I like to mention as I begin my first tale. According to him, it was the morning of the 24th of June, 2016, when the British people awakened to hear that their country had decided to leave the European Union. Their Prime Minister had resigned, and Scotland was considering conducting a referendum that may bring to an end the very existence of the United Kingdom. So that was a huge shock for them, and for the rest of the world. But it also triggered a full political catastrophe in their country over the next few days. But what did we learn from it? In hindsight, this huge event made us so realize how embarrassingly oblivious we seem to be about how divided our communities are. Therefore, Brexit represents something that concerns all of us, and it reveals the unfolded truth about the current state of politics. Politics today involves more than simply the right and the left, not simply tax and spend anymore. It is about globalization. The fault line between contemporary politics is between those who embrace globalization and those who fear it. Lest we forget about the first story, I like to start my second one with the following quote by John Lewis. "The vote is precious. It is the most powerful, non-violent tool we have in a democratic society, and we have to use it." John Lewis is often regarded as one of the bravest figures to emerge from the American Civil Rights Movement, and he devoted his existence to safeguarding human rights and ensuring civil freedoms. Voting gives people an opportunity to express partisanship and satisfy their need to feel a sense of belonging. It is about active citizenship and implication in society. The long battle for the right to vote can be viewed as a manifestation of a profound human craving for personal fulfillment. When talking about elections, all citizens of a country know that they have the right and the chance to vote. But still, the problem is motivation. How come some people are more involved in society than others? The answer lies within three factors. First, systemic grievances with the system of government, meaning that some people feel that they're unrepresented by politicians. Therefore comes a desire for them to take back control of their own lives through voting. Second, the disappointment resulted from the difference between expectations and results, which means that the fear of being wrong is greater than the desire to be right. And third, the stake of the vote, viewed from the personal point of view. As simple as that. Now, I would like to take a step back and ask you one very straightforward question. What can influence electoral behavior? I would say it is the feeling of belonging to a community and the sense of duty. And these are simple truths. When it comes to young people, including myself, we may be more mobile than the elderly, but less integrated into local communities. The results of the elections does not seem to have such a huge stake for us. Truth be told, we also have a non-participative culture. Maybe it's just a sense of disempowerment, or maybe we prefer a more direct, non-institutionalized form of activism. When it comes to mature and elderly people, they acquire a sense of civic duty and believe that voting is not only a right, but also a moral obligation of every citizen. When discussing a nation's connections with other nations on the world stage, its citizens may not seem important. Some claim that the government alone should handle such diplomatic matters, but in reality, it is the population that expresses its views by choosing who will represent it at the higher level through voting. Therefore, people are indirectly involved in these international relationships, and they are essential for defining the government in the first place. Now, what I would like everyone to reflect on is the following idea by Herbert George Wells. Fight it, or accept it. Fear it, or control it. Remembering the first story, some of the British people were afraid of leaving the European Union, while some of them were really afraid of remaining. Therefore, controlling the outcome meant voting at the referendum. Voting is an essential aspect of a democracy, but it is not the only one. A well-functioning society also requires the protection of human rights, the freedom of speech, and the rule of law. My stories are now finished. History has been written. It has not always been right or complete,
And my name is Daria Grecu. At the end of the day, I'm not a politician. I'm just a storyteller. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Yeah?
Yes. If voting is a moral duty, do you believe that voting should be mandatory?
Thank you. That is a wonderful question. Mandatory is a really strong word. I believe in the universal right to vote and to express your opinions. Mandatory, by that, I think you mean implementing civic education. By that is that young people should be involved in civic actions, be allowed to exercise the right to be heard. Civic education is essential in the upbringing of every individual. It is within this stage that people can make the difference between right and wrong and acquire these social morals that we're talking about. And ultimately, if measures like this are properly implemented, civic education, I mean, are surely going to increase the numbers of young voters and to actually give them a chance to express their opinions. Thank you.
Any more questions? No? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Grosu Alesia Miruna. Good luck.
In 1918, at the end of World War I, Woodrow Wilson, the US president of that time, mentioned the principle of self-determination, which is actually a cardinal principle in today's international law, and it represents the right of a people from a state to determine their own collective future with no interference. This principle, ladies and gentlemen, would work ideally only if the boundaries of a nation corresponded with the boundaries of a state. But that doesn't really happen in our world, so we must learn how to cope. My name is Grosu Alesia Miruna, and through my speech I wish to underpin that unless nations and states strive for the same goals, havoc can be wreaked. We should be aware that nations and states, as well as their roles, are usually mistaken for one another. So in order to make everything clear enough, we should note that the state has a permanent population, defined territory and government, and the capacity to have international relations with other states, while the nation is simply a collection of people who share a commonly perceived identity. What we also tend to neglect is the distinction between the social conflict and the political conflict. Understanding such differences is essential in order to live in a stable and prosperous world. Let me quote from what Ion Rațiu stated. "Democracy for me means that I will fight to the very last drop of blood just for you to have the right to have a different opinion than mine." So, in a democratic world, centralization of ideas and concepts is crucial. This is why we need people with a proper education to represent us, people who can manage certain situations with sensibility rather than sensitivity. But when it comes to a conflict of a social, cultural nature, the government should know when and how to take a step back and let the nation decide. Now let's take adequate examples. For instance, we all are well acquainted with Pelé, one of the most extraordinary football players of all time. After his death this December, FIFA's president Gianni Infantino asked every single country in the world to name one of their stadiums after Pelé. How was this perceived by various peoples and even football fans around the world? As a monument to folly. In such situations, people should be the ones with the initiative, willing to praise the person amongst them, not the politicians. It should simply not be imposed, but chosen by the nation. Then we have the situation in which my country, Romania, found itself after not being accepted in the Schengen area. It was swiftly and strongly acknowledged as an insult to our nation. and it brought about a lot of fury and resentment. In such a case, political and economical conflicts, alongside failure of statutory diplomacy, represented the starting point of a heartfelt social conflict. A conflict reflected by the Romanian people's attitude towards the blissfully unaware Austrian nation. But now I want you to ask yourselves, what happens when social motives are used in order to achieve political interests? When the weapon of fear is pointed directly against humanity. That is when chaos arises. That is what we see in today's Russo-Ukrainian war. Because after all, a soldier on the battlefield does not fight for his country's economic position in the world or whatsoever, but for his nation, for his culture, for his family, for everything that is deeply ingrained in his soul and is believed to be threatened, to be stolen. And when this peril is only an illusion created by the establishment, the world is off balance. Humanity, as we know it, is on the verge of collapse. This is why I strongly believe that the government can and does play a significant role in our international relations, but it should know when to take a step back. We should know when a situation requires our intervention as a nation and when it can be handled by the political institutions. Because after all, yes, some situations and some relations are just too important to be left to governments alone. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? Yeah.
If we fight to the last drop of blood and our enemy fights to the last drop of their blood, who can proudly say that they've won?
That's a good question. I've never really thought about that. I don't believe that wars are especially won by the person who brutally defeated the other. I mean, that by the people who brutally defeated the other. I think the people that win a war are the ones who actually learn something from it and achieve something, try to achieve something through war, because there is no excuse to war, okay? War should simply not exist, but it does. So how can we turn this into something beneficial? Because this is the situation. It is what it is, and we must learn how to adapt to it and make the best of it for us.
Yeah. Do you think that there should be things in which the government needs to impose?
There might be. This is a really good question, and I believe that the example of what is happening right now in France is a really good one, because the government states that it's necessary to impose this raising of the age retirement, although the nation is completely against it and protests for a very long time. But they consider that it must be done. It must be done for the economical situation of the French people, after all. It's something that they will benefit of in the future. And whether the president right now is taking the right decision in still wanting to impose such law, such reform actually, it's controversial, but it is a must here. And people maybe one day should understand that.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Do you believe social aspects and political aspects of history and politics should be kept absolutely separate, or there should be some middle ground?
I don't think that we can totally draw a line between anything in our world. Everything is interconnected after all. I mean, social aspects influence political aspects after all, and we must always communicate. I'm not saying that we as a nation should decide without the government's opinion or whatever, what to do for us and so on. I'm saying that we should know when to take the majority of the situation into our hands and when not. But yes, we should communicate. We should not draw a line, for sure.
Okay. No more questions? Okay. Thank you. Next up we have Hangano Tudoriwan.
Start. Lovely members of the audience, esteemed jury, we live in a complex and interconnected world where the actions of one nation can send shockwaves across the globe. So it is for this very reason that I believe international relations should be mainly the job of the government, because they are best equipped to navigate the intricate web of diplomacy and also negotiate on behalf of the people. It is only with strong and decisive leadership that we can safeguard our nation's interests and also ensure a better, safer, more prosperous world for future generations. Now, I'm not saying that other actors, such as the civil society or the business sector, shouldn't be involved in this process whatsoever. On the contrary, why not comfort them the same role they have in national politics, that of watchdogs? So they watch over the system, and when things aren't going the way they are supposed to, they speak up and they say, hey, we have a problem here. So this is the case I'm making. The government shouldn't hold a monopoly over international relations, but it should be heavily involved in the decision-making process for several reasons. First and foremost, we have efficiency. The government has both the resources and the expertise necessary to implement an effective foreign policy. Diplomacy in itself is one of the oldest, most ancient fields of study, with works such as Il Principe by Niccolo Machiavelli guiding generations of statesmen. In fact, it is even said that Winston Churchill himself had a copy of the book on his nightstand. Now, to add to this, we also have one of the oldest schools in the world, the Pontifical Ecclesiastic Academy, which was founded in 325 AD with the very purpose of training cardinals of the papacy into the art of diplomacy. Our society itself is being shaped by men and women who go daily onto the international stage to represent not their countries, but their fellow citizens, and even the citizens of other countries. Take here, for example, the former US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who almost single-handedly negotiated an end to the Vietnam War, thus saving millions of lives. And this begs the question, and we really have to ask ourselves, where would we be today? Where would our society, where would our world be today without diplomats like him? Now, unfortunately, we also have to talk about the issue of nationalism, especially extreme nationalism, which has seen an increase in popularity in recent years, especially in developed countries, such as the United States or countries in Europe. Now, as Charles de Gaulle said, patriotism is when love of your own people comes first. Nationalism, however, is when hate for people other than your own comes first. So, by allowing this ideology into current international affairs, we do nothing more than erase years' worth of progress when it comes to building an interconnected and globalized society. Basically, everything done after World War II would be in vain. A war which, by the way, was sparked by the very same extreme nationalism I am talking about. So, by allowing groups of individuals with such views into the current decision-making system, we go down a slippery slope. At best, our country makes a fool of itself on the international stage, and at worst, people suffer and die. Last but not least, there is the aspect of fair representation. Governments can represent their people, their citizens, in ways that individuals or private organizations simply cannot. And this is particularly important for small countries, for countries without big economies or big militaries, as it is basically the only way they can make their voices heard on the international stage. So, in conclusion, let us remember that for a healthy and functioning society, the involvement of all actors in international politics is crucial, because, as Edmund Burke reminds us, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil in this world is for a good man to sit by and do nothing. So let us not be passive in the face of important issues that affect us all, because it is our duty as citizens to be informed, to care, and most importantly, to speak up. So let us unite in our common pursuit of fair representation and hold our elected officials accountable for their actions on the international stage. Because together we can truly make a difference, but we just have to care. Thank you very much.
Do we have any questions? Yeah.
How would you convince a person voting for an extremist party to change their views?
Well, to be honest, it is not my duty to change their views, but I guess we can prevent them from voting altogether by providing generations of children with an education. So eradicating extremism is not an overnight process. It takes years, maybe even generations. So I think it is a long-term endeavor that we must undertake.
Yeah.
At the beginning, you started to talk about Niccolo Machiavelli and how Winston Churchill had one of his books on his nightstand. But then, do you think that modern politicians and presidents also use Machiavelli's principles? And perhaps you could outline some principles of Machiavellism.
Well, I do believe that even modern politics is influenced by the principles of Machiavelli. One of them being, for example, that a good leader must do more or less whatever it takes to fulfill the interest and, most importantly, the stability of his estate, or in our modern world, country. And yes, I do believe that Machiavellism still influences a good deal of current national and international affairs, indeed.
Okay. Yeah.
If you were a state leader, would you rather be hated or loved?
Well, first and foremost, as a state leader, you are a politician. And no, you have to be hated by someone. Not everyone can love you. But I would rather be loved than hated.
Yeah.
So, in the beginning, when you were talking about governments and how they should not hold a monopoly over politics, but take action, you then mentioned that governments have or own the resources, and as such. So, do government own resources, or do the resources belong to the state, the people, let's say?
Well, first and foremost, the resources belong to the state, to the people, and we grant the people who are in the government, we grant them with permission to use them. So we entrust them with said resources. And yes, I do believe that we have to be really careful and considerate when trusting someone with such power over a nation's destiny, after all.
Okay. Any more questions? Yeah?
How do you define diplomacy for the purpose of this speech?
Come again?
How do you define diplomacy for the purpose of this speech?
Well, I think that for the purpose of this speech, diplomacy is, as the topic of this year's contest is, relations between nations. Because we have to accept the fact that we are not in an isolated bubble or in an island living secluded from the rest of the world. We have to communicate, we have to undertake international activities. And for that, we need diplomacy. We need to know and we need to try to be on the best terms as possible with everyone surrounding us. Of course, that is an ideal case, but I believe we should strive for that.
Thank you. Next up we have Marginan Marius Andreu.
Of course.
Once upon a time, this auditorium this city, the capital of our beloved nation, our homeland, would have seemed so very foreign. Not because of aspect or landscape, but because of society and politics. No longer than 40 years ago, under the rule of the totalitarian regime, many of the things we now consider to be given, such as the right for freedom of information, for freedom of speech, for freedom of learning, for freedom of travel, would have seemed unthinkable because of its own nature. Such villainized was the simple act of traveling to a different country that if you tried to do so, you would be shot on sight by border guards. Was this really a crime heinous enough to warrant execution? If so, why? You didn't think everyone would leave, I don't think so. There must be more to it. And there is. For a totalitarian state, this would have been an attack to its foundation. Ignorance breeds fear, and fear breeds complacency. The fundament of a strong totalitarian regime enchanted by its own self-declared paradise. Understanding, however, brings them all to their knees. No amount of state propaganda can stand the test of traveling to the Western countries and seeing that the capitalist pigs fare so much better in their everyday lives. And they don't go hungry in the same way we do. I'll give the example of a dear friend of mine from Afghanistan. In his country, they were always taught that the Pakistani are to be hated and they are at fault for every single problem they encounter. However, upon traveling with Youth Connectors for the Future to Sweden, in a sort of intercultural workshop, he got to talk to the Pakistani delegation and actually find out that the devil was not as black as it was painted. And those people became, from other participants, his dear friends. And when terrorist attack happened, he wasn't angry and didn't participate in the blame game, but rather was worried about the safety of his friends. In this regard, a famous US diplomat, Gregory Payne, says that nothing works better than the people-to-people approach diplomacy. A simple conversation between two or more individuals in which they share their beliefs, find common ground, and build mutual respect for their differences. This sort of grassroots level of building understanding helps us go to the core of each other and escape the clutches of the state's propaganda and their beliefs. It's connecting with the ones around us as people, rather than something far away. In this regard, we must certainly make the distinction between the nation and the state. The elites that rule the land between lines drawn on maps are not always the best representatives for their people, for their interests, their culture, their ideas, or even what they want. And that's a good thing in a way, because they don't have the power we have. No amount of treaties, declarations, handshakes between the powerful holds as much weight as widespread fraternity between commoners. They cannot tell us who to love, who to hate, who to marry, who to befriend. And nowhere does this ring truer than north of our border, where Russia could not turn brothers against brothers, although they really tried. Had the Russian army really wanted to fight, they would have conquered Ukraine in a week. They are the second biggest military superpower in the world, after all. But when the people do not want to fight, money can buy bloodshed, but bloodshed cannot buy victory. And that spells doom for a nation so fused with its own pride. The reality is that this also sets a precedent for future expansionist dictators and moderates their destructive ambitions, making the world a better place. But it's easy to talk about things like this when bombs aren't falling around. And it's easy to pretend that change has to happen elsewhere. The reality is that it's a great part of who we are that also creates such problems. We came to speech competitions for prizes and awards, instead of to listen and to build ideas. We want to go somewhere far away just so everyone sees how good we are, how good we know how to speak. For what? Instead of learning, instead of growing? Is that what we want to build in this world? Isn't that not the problem in society we're trying to destroy? It's cruel. And for this reason, we must stop valuing prejudice. We must stop valuing our own self-declared validation, our own thirst for acclamation, more than compassion, kindness, and building understanding with one another. We're not living the world we're trying to create, and it's our responsibility to win this fight against ourselves here and now and in every other moment of our lives. It's not somewhere far away. So I urge you all, make it happen, do your part. Our states will catch up too. We're democracies, the governments will live by our values eventually. And it's our responsibility to make it happen. Please, do your part.
Do we have any questions? Yes.
Please. Wouldn't you say that Russia's inability to conquer Ukraine is actually due to their sheer incompetence and of their military? Because their equipment is outdated, their tactics are old.
The reality of the fact is that although the Russian military is old, the Ukrainian military is still a small part of the ex-Soviet military. And certainly there are some strategic concerns to it. But I think that if you have a very determined army that really wants to fight, and you don't have to actually conscript soldiers for a war, but rather volunteers show up, the Russians had way more people and would have been far more capable of conquering Ukraine much easier. I hope that clears up.
So since you've had such a powerful call to action in us doing our part, I guess now the question is, how do you do your part?
Well, that's why I came here after all. I only wanted to build the ability to speak in public. I've never actually went to a speech before. And that was for personal development, but also the will to listen to other people's ideas, to make friends, to learn. And also my contact with the people from other countries in researching this. My friend is a very dear friend of my mother. He's a freedom fighter from Afghanistan. He worked with a US journalist in order to better his people. And I actually texted him last night, asked him how his experience has been, how his life has been, how his family is doing in Canada now that he escaped. I think it has been a great experience for me to grow and to learn. And that's way more valuable than any prize. Because I feel like I've just won by default, no matter the result. Please.
Do you think that re-establishing diplomatic ties, like it's happening right now in Saudi Arabia and Iran, it's enough to make two nations, which you also mentioned, who have been taught to hate each other, to suddenly make them understand and feel compassion for one another?
I think in order for understanding and compassion to be built, there has to be two great fundamentals of diplomacy. The first of them is trust. You cannot build relations with a country you do not trust and who you think has interests against you. So they must certainly establish some degree of rapport in which they certainly show that that's their true intention, rather than something else. And the second one is something called strategic listening. The ability to hear beyond words and actually gauge the meaning, the cultural meaning words have in different countries. This is often a problem that builds to miscommunications and breakdowns of diplomatic relations. Because when someone says something, they don't always mean what you think they mean. And they must certainly be careful in that. But if these two things are established, I think certainly any sort of relationship can be mended. In politics and also in life. Please.
The way I see it, in most cases problems arise from national issues. A house divided against itself cannot stand, Abraham Lincoln said. So bridging international relationships is easy. How do you bridge relationships within a country? And I refer here to nationalism, extremism.
Are you referring to like division between like?
Yes, political divisions.
Oh, I think that's basically done through education. Encouraging people to build their perspective upon the basis of as many perspectives around them as possible. Teaching people to actively listen and to draw conclusions from what other people are saying and then encompass them in their own understanding. Because when we understand each other, we no longer fight over our ideas, but rather build some better idea together. And in a way, that's what will really propel our world forward.
Any more questions? No.
Thank you very much.
Can I start?
Yeah.
So it all starts with Plato writing the Republica. It basically states what a state should be made of and what the government should do. Then comes Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Thomas Hobbes that actually make the social contract, and that actually leads to us realizing that we are giving up our liberties and freedom for rights and actual security. Then you fast forward to Karl Marx, the inventor of communism, you read his manifesto, you might even read a bit of Adam Smith and see how the other side, the capitalist side, is doing, and then you don't know what to do. And you don't understand how all these ideas can come together, all these philosophical and political ideologies can actually contend with the state we live in today. But then I saw a quote from George Carlin, one of his Sunday Night Live skits, in which he said that man is basically just a hairless ape that questions and complains. And that made me rewrite my whole speech on the train here. Because I was going to talk about all these philosophical ideas and how the state works today and how it was created. But then I realized that none of it really stuck. None of the ideas that we have, even Plato and even Socrates, none of it really works today. Because all people have done throughout history is complain, question, and actually do things. Let's look, first off, at Joe Louis, a great example of one man who questioned racism. And this is something that spans across many countries, that spans across a lot of nations, and we can see how he solved it personally. He was a jazz musician with no social degree, he wasn't a psychologist, but through actual conversation, he managed to change the mind of a KKK leader and actually make him give up his robe. This was broadcasted on CNN for 24 hours live and the whole world saw it. This was a great moment of how communication can actually help. But how do we really communicate? How should we communicate with ideas? How should we talk with the philosophers that came before us and actually understand them? Well, we should basically question everything. Because the fundamental state that has become today, the fundamentally of the state is very varied. A lot of states and a lot of communities, a lot of countries have very different ideologies. We see that Russia and North Korea still subscribe to the communist and totalitarian nations of, I don't know, you don't really need freedom because we have got you covered. And then you have the West that's really capitalistic and based on freedom, that says, okay, go off, do your own thing, do what you can and make do in this capitalist state, but we're not really going to help you. So how can you bridge the gap between these nations? How can you really make people understand everything that you want to make them understand so you can actually achieve a bit of prosperity and peace? Well, we should start off by actually just questioning. Because questioning has done a lot of good in the past. We have a story about 3 men on a nuclear submarine during World War II. And it actually saved probably the whole planet from mutually assured destruction. Because 2 of those people voted to fire off a nuke towards the USA in a Russian submarine, but one general questioned it. One general questioned it that it could just be an exercise. That it could not be a deliberate attack and then that firing off a nuke could actually start the war. And then we were saved. We were saved from mutually assured destruction. We've got a lot of people who question in this world, but we have to understand that questioning is part of the human nature. This is how all the philosophies that I stated in the beginning have come to be. This is what we have always done from the beginning of time, is question and complain. Now let's look at 2 sides of the same coin and actually address the main issue of the speech. How can we really bridge the gap between the people and the state? Well, we have done it already. This is a lesson we have learned. This is something we know from the beginning of time. Because man complained about being cold and he built a fire. Man complained about having to sail for 60 days on the ocean and then built a plane. The Wright brothers actually did it. So even though we have to question everything, we should actually realize that the state actually does so too. But the state can be dehumanizing. Politicians are humans after all, but when you talk about decisions on a national scale, it's really hard to see the impact. And as Thomas Sowell put it, it's really dumb to let people who can partake in the consequences of a decision make that decision. So, to leave you off, I'd like to tell you a story about what happened to me in Berlin. I was walking along the ruins of the Berlin Wall and I saw a quote written on a ruinous piece of concrete that said, "Question all authority except your mom." So if you want a practical solution, just do that. Thank you.
Do we have any questions?
We question things to find answers, but actually, how do we find them?
I guess the point is not to find deliberate and consistent answers for every question, because you just won't. We have things, or we have things in the scientific field that come in a broad category called dark matter, and that applies to ideas. We have a lot of dark matter in the ideological field of how we should live our life, how states should be run, and I don't think it's our duty or responsibility to find answers, just to seek them. Thank you.
Yes.
Since you mentioned Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Hobbes, could you briefly explain their philosophy?
Well, the social contract is basically really simple. Man was a peaceful part of nature in the beginning of time, and then he decided that he's more safe, he's more comfortable, and he just has a better life if he gives up the absolute freedom of wandering around through the fields to actually build, I don't know, a fire in a cave or some walls and actually settle down and begin farming and making a community. But this has influenced many of our societies today because now we see the social contract as being breached. Now we see that they are taking more liberties from us and that are actually giving us less rights than we had before. So this is what I mean when we should even question the notion of the social contract, because it might not be valuable and viable today.
Yes?
So do you think that a technocratic government without political affiliation would be the solution?
No, not really. Because I think, as Joe Lewis did in my example, he practically sat down with a member of the KKK, a person who hated him, who personally hated him for just having melanin in his skin. And this has led to a discussion about his ideology. This has led to a discussion that actually changed someone for the better. I'm all for political pluralism, and I think it should be quite the opposite. We should have a state that actually represents all four corners of the political compass, no matter how bad they can be, because if we give it enough time, and if we do enough questioning and complaining, we might actually bridge the gap between all those four corners. Thank you.
Any more questions? Yes.
So basically you are advocating for having, I don't know, extremists in government, only hoping that at some point they will become moderates?
We can't really ignore the law, because if I go out and become a terrorist and bomb, I don't know, an airport, yeah, I'll go to jail and I'll be punished for it. But at the same time, I think that the statue of David in Florence was considered very lewd and an example of sexuality in society that was considered outlandish, extremist. But now we see it as probably the most beautiful statue in the world and a pinnacle in the world of art. So that I think is the importance of extremism in society, because we can't really draw the line anywhere just because we don't like it and we don't really stand with it. It should be allowed to exist, because in 20 years' time or 2,000 years' time, it might be very, very beautiful and very helpful.
Thank you. Last but not least, we have Paul Beatriz. One second, please.
Look, I was this close not being here with you all today. I know you're all tired, I know you've heard so many speeches before me, but I actually didn't want to come to the regional heat, because I was the very last one to make the cut. And I woke up that morning, I didn't know what to do, I felt like I couldn't really prove myself to the people around me, but something in me, something made me get out of bed. But, you know, for now, enough about me. This is not a story about me, and it's not a story about you. It's the story of a man. A man with two beautiful children, with a loving wife, a man who has hobbies and passions and goes to work every single day. But that man's life has changed forever after getting one letter. Now, 30 seconds have passed, and that man is now dead. And you all could have prevented it. Every 30 seconds, one person dies because of an armed conflict between nations. We believe that we live in a prosperous world, that international relations flourish, right? Like, we cannot go back to all those atrocities in the Great Wars. Yet, in other parts of the world, people are suffering, and every 30 seconds, a person dies. And we're finally starting to realize, as this is happening right next to us right now, one fundamental truth: that relations between nations are way too important to be left to governments alone. That by giving a handful of politicians more power in their hands and empathy in their heart, another man has died. Well, just to continue my story, right? What did get me out of bed? Well, it was my very own speech. I thought that, well, there are going to be some great ideas, but I don't think a lot of you were going to talk about what I'm going to say next. Just to prove how the fact that we don't know as much as we think about the world. Please raise your hands if you've heard anything in the past month about the Ukraine-Russia war. Right? Okay, I think we've heard it like 20 minutes ago. But raise your hands if you've heard anything about the ongoing conflict between Eritrea and Tigray in the last month. Oh, one hand there. Okay, and there's my dad, yeah, of course. The thing is, you haven't heard about the fact that 200,000 people have died in only 2 months because of the famine caused by the war? No, we think we know so much about the world, but how about the Middle East? How about Africa? How about the people that aren't right next to us? We know about Ukraine and Russia because it interests us, because our lives are at play, but how about the other? It's all a lottery. We could have been then. You could have been that person. Your father could have been that man that died in war and dies every single second. But the thing is, it's not all lost, right? There are 4 steps you can start taking right now in order to change this. 1, listen. Are you hearing me? Can you, yeah, okay. But are you listening to me? Are you listening to my ideas, what I'm trying to communicate? Are you listening to other people? Are you actively trying to find out what's happening in the world? If not, this is the time to do so. Secondly, speak, talk to other people, express your ideas, please ask me questions. Don't ever take what I'm saying for granted. Do your own research, right? So talk, spread ideas. 3, act. Of course, we've heard so many speeches about this and so many great ideas. You can be part of NGOs, you can be part of politics, you can start teaching yourself different things, right? That's amazing, and you should start doing that, but only after knowing what's happening, because it's so obvious that we're oblivious to what's happening around us. And the 4th thing, well, I've done all those 3 things, right? By being here today, by talking, by listening to others, by acting, by being here, by getting out of bed. But the last thing I have to do is apologize. Apologize to the people who never got an apology. Apologize to the families that got destroyed because of the fact that we didn't know what was happening to them, because we were covering our ears while they were screaming at us. So, to them, please forgive us for never apologizing. And if this is not enough, remember, we've spent around 5 minutes together and 10 people have died. The next are, well, your responsibility. Thank you.
Any questions? Yes?
Do you think one person can bring another person to the state of attention where they are aware of the things that happen?
Yeah, of course, we have family, we have friends, we have social media influencers, right? We're in the era of information, so it's very easy to influence one another in good and in bad ways. So, of course, we can influence one another in very simple ways, like normal interactions.
Yes?
Do you think it's fair to judge people so harshly for not being involved in conflicts that happen so far removed from their personal lives?
I wouldn't say judging, I would say bringing awareness. At the same time, I do think we should feel responsible for it. We should feel responsible for not knowing, but only to make us do better in the future.
Any more questions? Yes.
So what about the government? What do you think that the government can do to achieve your idealistic future?
Yeah, well, the government is part of the people, right? As other speakers said, democracy is the power of the people. So people should be the ones choosing, electing a government that fits their best interests, right? So I think this is the first step, and this is how governments come into play, by people voting for the right people to represent them and to represent their interests.
Any more questions?
Do you think one single man can make a difference?
Yeah, of course, we have so many examples in the world. We have examples right here. I heard one speech, I won't say the name, and it changed my entire perspective. It's one person, yet it made me think. So many other people, so many people who were part of social movements made a change just by being there, by being present, and by spreading ideas. And I think this is what the English-speaking union is all about. So,
thank you. With that, we conclude our 10 finalists. Thank you for being here.
Okay, everyone, so I think now we're going to ask the participants and the audience to have a little break for about half an hour, and we'll call you back when it's time. Wow. Okay, if I may have everybody's attention, I know we're all curious to see what happened, so yes, we're going to get to that in a moment. Before we do that, we would like to do a special thanks for all the volunteers that have helped us for the semifinals and for the finals today. And we do actually have some certificates for them, so we'll be quickly calling those out before we move on to feedback and the prize giving ceremony. So, we would like to specifically and especially thank Radu Ștefan Marincea for his Teresa Brezan, our lovely timekeeper and cheer for today. Many, many thanks. Elena Bodare, our presenter. Thank you very much. Raluca Alexandra Chelaru. Eliza Agate. Natalia Sanmartin.
Yeah, she's not here today.
You will take it. Can you take it and...
Yeah, sure, give it to me.
Excellent.
Natalia, give it to me.
Horia Mihai Petre. Maria Nicoara. Medea Cenan Poanda. Oscar Paula.
Maria, thank you very much.
Oh, Maria.
This ain't mine.
Maria?
Oh,
Medea.
I agree.
Yes, my name is Natalia from now.
Paula Moșcaru.
You don't listen.
Luca Bălsan. Vlad Alexandru Ceaușu. Andrei Banu. Iris Alexandra Florea. Andrei Ioan Strâmbei.
Yeah, give that to me. Give that to me. No, this is Andrei Banus.
Okay. Iris. Wait. Iris. Bianca Alexandra Svet. Ana Burak. Adriana
What? So I have to get one more.
Anna, you can take that. Okay, you're here.
Oh, my eye burns.
Wait a second, let's look.
Actually, try not miss.
Thank you. Thank you guys.
Are you serious?
And now I would like to. Now I'd like to invite Kendall P to just say a few words, take away from all of us for today.
Okay, I realise it's 12:30, you probably more than listen to me, you'd probably prefer to be sitting somewhere eating. So I'll keep this short and to the point. Firstly, just to say that to speak publicly is probably one of the most difficult things to do. There are many people who are famous for public speaking, and they generally say the same thing. They make it look easy, but they always say how difficult it is. And so I think the art of public speaking is not getting to a point that is easy, because I'm not sure that it ever is easy. And even if you come up here 100 times, I think you're still going to be quite nervous in doing it. I think the point is maybe just to become more comfortable with that nervousness you feel. And if you look at great athletes, they actually say that one of the things that gives them the edge is that nervousness. And I think it's starting to use that nervousness as your friend, and it's something that can catapult you to greatness in terms of the way that you speak. I think you have to think about public speaking in the context of the way in which you're public speaking. And in the context here, if you look at someone like Barack Obama, I'm sure a lot of you have seen Steve Jobs in his inauguration speech. You would have listened to people historically like Martin Luther King and JFK. Well, you can take something away from them, but their situation is fundamentally different to yours. They're not competing. When Barack Obama is standing there to speak, it is only Barack Obama. There aren't 9 speakers before Barack Obama, and Barack Obama has to stand out. Of course, he would stand out. There are not 9 speakers before Steve Jobs, although there will be introduction speakers. It's really, he is the keynote speaker, and everyone wants to listen to him. So, as much as you can take away from them in terms of the way that they speak, you have to understand that this is a public speaking competition, and it's very different. So I think in order to win this competition, you really have to ask some fundamental questions. And I think one of those questions is, what is your message? If you're not clear what your message is, then the audience are not going to be clear either. And as much as it pains me to say this, when the judges were speaking, we said probably from today's speeches, we may remember 3 or 4 people, but at the end of the day, there was really only one speech that we will remember. And come back in a week's time, if you ask any of the judges, and indeed the audience, not the parents and the people who came, because they will remember your speech and they were here for you. But if it's the audience X who doesn't know you, how will they remember you? And I think this is a question you have to ask. So, let's start with some basics. How did you dress in a way that you will be remembered? So, you dressed in black, and Steve Jobs might have dressed in black, but you're not Steve Jobs. So to dress like Steve Jobs is something, but I will remember because I'm using this as an example. But if I didn't use it as an example, there was nothing that would stand out. I'll remember Catalina because she's wearing a bright pink jacket. One of the things I remember about Oscar Wilde is the flamboyancy in the way he dressed. When he came into the room, before he even spoke, you'd be affronted by the way that that person dressed. If no one else is wearing a bow tie, and one person is wearing a bow tie, then that person is going to stand out. There's nothing generally that I would refer to as overdressed. There is always something underdressed. But if you notice that there's 6 other people wearing a bow tie, see, this is where you have to think wise. If you've just seen 3 people speak in front of you and they were all wearing a bow tie, what are you going to do? Drop the bow tie. You're just going to be the fourth bow tie speaking in a row. So public speaking, you've got to mix it up as well. You want to stand out in the way you dress. Probably if you were smart, you would probably bring a change of clothing with you. And you might even have 2 jackets in your bag, and you've just seen all the people speaking in front of you and thinking, no one stood out, I need to stand out. Right, I'm going to go with this super bright blue jacket, etc. So how do you dress in a way that you will be remembered? Number 2, how do you speak in the way that you will be remembered? If everyone is shouting and you speak quietly, you'll probably be remembered. If everyone speaks in a way that is this way, and you speak like this, more than likely, you'll be remembered. The shock appeal is not to be underestimated. There has to be something that they remember about you tomorrow and next week. And probably for 7 or 8 of you at least, there really is nothing to remember you for. You didn't speak in a way that was different to any other person. And I come back to that point, is there are 10 speakers in a row. You've got to stand out somehow. And being the super nice guy from next door, or that nicely dressed girl, because all the girls are nicely dressed and professional in their office attire, you don't stand out. So think about the way that you dress, which maybe is in terms of what is your signature. Also, the message, it has to be simple. I'd like to credit everyone in the audience as being more able and talented. But the truth is, people have a limited ability to process. And if you give them too much information, they're just not going to take it on. It's going to go in one ear and out the rest. So there's nothing that is too much in terms of simplification. Simplify it again, and simplify it again. A really good person to give a speech to is probably your 5-year-old brother or sister. 50 years ago, there was something called academia for academia's sake. One way in which you serviced yourself and proved to everyone that you were a great academic is you wrote in a way that nobody understood. It's like, wow, that is a really bright professor, because I really didn't understand anything he was talking about. Aldous Huxley graduated from Oxford University, one of the great novelists of his time, went to America, and he got a job working for Disney Studios, Walt Disney. But actually, they never published any of his movie reviews, which was quite a puzzle. And there was an interviewer, a reporter at some point who was interviewing me, and they said, who was interviewing Walt Disney, and they said, look, you had Aldous Huxley writing for you, great writer, but why did you never publish any of his reviews? And Walt Disney, in reply, said, look, the truth is, I didn't understand every 4th word that he wrote. So he was just too smart and too articulate. And yes, so you can use a rhetoric that impresses people. And in looking at the art of speech, this is where you need to know your audience. And really good politicians, as I said, they change the way they dress. So when Tony Blair goes to speak to the coal miners, he'll take his tie off, or he'll unbutton his tie and loosen it. He'll take his jacket off, he'll roll his sleeves up, because he's trying to convey the idea of what?
Equality?
In a way, yeah, that he's working class. I've rolled my sleeves up, like you, I get the job done, I'm here to work. But he's not going to do that when he goes to speak to the stockbrokers. He's not going to dumb down his Etonian RP accent. At that point, he knows that the stock market will be impressed that he went to Oxford and that he has that RP, and he went to Eton, he went to Oxford. He knows that that is the place where actually to wear the jacket and to sound like he's got RP is exactly what he should be doing. So when my students go to debate, I sort of say, right, entertain the room, but be very aware of who the judges are. And if there are 3 judges who are female, you should be debating in order to take into account that it is females who will be making the final decision. So you need to think about this. You don't know who your judges are going to be, but you do, because your judges are all teachers. And teachers look at the world in a certain way. They're not paid enough. They're not respected. You know, teaching students is just a hassle. And the best part of their day is the weekend and the holidays. I'm exaggerating. You know, I think the vast majority of teachers who are there because they love their students and are passionate about their topic. But to think about the audience and to think about the judges is important. And then, how do you engage an audience? And I think there were probably 2 or 3 students who did something that was a little bit different. Okay, you all use quotes. When you use quotes, don't assume that people know who you're quoting. So if you believe that not everyone in the room knows that person you're quoting, then do what some of you did, which was actually to say who that person was. So if everyone knows who Henry Kissinger is, you don't need to provide, in parenthesis, any additional information. But if not everyone in the room knows that person, then actually that quote is lost. Because in journalism, unless you know who it is, don't quote them at all. And if you are quoting someone that people don't know, at least let them know this person was the head of this committee, this organization, wrote this book which was monumental to a change in thought. So when you're quoting, choose your quotes carefully and also ensure that people know who you're quoting. Personalize your content. I think 2 or 3 did that well, and I think those who get in the top 3, I think they personalize the content better than anyone else. Okay. A lot of you were very good with your research, but I think these days the world's been through a series of changes in terms of leadership. And I think that leading from the pulpit is an era that is kind of behind us. And they talk about a 5th generation leader who is actually leading from behind. They tend to be pushing people forward and developing leadership. And they say that one of the most important things of someone who's leading in that style, and I've seen it talked about a lot, and even some of the top universities have published articles in the last few months saying the #1 thing for leadership these days is something that I think would never have been considered that even 5 years ago. It's showing your vulnerability. And I think there were a couple of students, 2 in particular, out of the 10, who showed their vulnerability. And it could come across that they're not confident, and it could come across as that they are not developed in the way that they're speaking. But more often than not these days, it comes across in that actually they're a real person. And you think when you're flicking through your multimedia pages, that you're looking for someone who's real, because we're tired of looking at people who aren't real. They're not real in the message they deliver, and they're not real in the way that they dress. So, they're trying to create a facade and a face in front of them. So that 5th generation leader, level 5 leader, it's someone who's comfortable to be wrong, someone who's comfortable to make mistakes, someone who's comfortable to actually let people inside. And I'm directly involved in recruitment in my school. And one of the people wrote back to me who were advertising a leadership position. And he said, why didn't I get the job? Why I made the shortlist. And I said exactly that to him. I said, look, I was looking for a person. And when we asked you the questions, you had these very generic answers. So you knew what to say, but actually I wanted someone that I felt would be a person that my students and colleagues could connect with. And by the end of the interview, I really didn't know who you were as a person. You gave me great answers, but I didn't actually know what you stood for or who you are as a person. And I'd rather have someone that I know who they are and I get a sense of who they are than someone who's just trying to say everything correctly. It's one thing that I like actually about the British ambassador to Romania, Andrew Noble. We've had some great ambassadors to Romania. I think they're all good. And I've known them all in the last 4 ambassadors we had. And I guess it's probably wrong to pick favorites, but
what I do like about Andrew Noble is he's very approachable. He's very personable. At no time do you feel that he's talking down to you. You feel like he's talking, and actually, well, that's one thing that they said they loved about Queen Elizabeth II, is that she would take the time to speak to the person on the gate. Everyone said that she was there for everyone. So to be vulnerable is important, and to be original. And I think that maybe comes back to our original point. And I think also to reward the audience as well. And I think, sometimes, okay, you ask rhetorical questions. You engage the audience in terms of you ask them questions. And that's important. You involve them by using the second person. I think a lot of you are using the second person, but I think you could use the first person plural a little bit more. You is engaging, but we is together. And it's just, I think it's a more powerful message when it's we than because you is a divide, isn't it? They're there, it's a dichotomy. I'm here, you're there, and there's something dividing us. But we, and if you look at the great speeches, Kennedy, he gives the I, the first person personal, because if you're a person in the public eye, people are hungry for personal knowledge. They want to know about you as a person. And that's why we, have journalists out there seeking to take pictures, private pictures of these public figures in their personal lives, which, is a very fine line. You look at someone like Princess Diana, ultimately paid the price of that because she was being hounded by the media and ended up dying. So there's a very fine line. But I think someone in the public eye, they know that they have to give a certain amount of public content because the audience are hungry for it. But Kennedy, once he did that, right, I've given you my pound of flesh. It transpired straight from I to we. And I think the speech really has to be we. It has to be us together. And the closer that you can stand to the audience or draw the audience in, anything that forms that connection is probably the right thing to do in the speech. So, once again, well done to everyone. I think rhetoric is a lifetime journey. Sometimes they say, you know that you've reached the end of your journey when you come back to the beginning. And many times I felt like that myself, even as a head of school. Some days I go into school and I think, I've been a head of school for 12 years. And some days I just think, how did I ever end up here? Because I really feel like today is my first day as head of school. I think you go through life never feeling that you quite achieve what it is you want to achieve. And you'll have days that you feel like you're an imposter, and you'll just think, and I've heard many of my friends say this to me, that just think, I don't feel like I'm experienced enough to be leading people. But I think that also is a good position, because then you don't make assumptions and you don't make presumptions. And you never think that you're better than anyone else. And it means that actually you're with people. You are one of the we. So regardless of the outcome, by the way, and I say this to my daughter, I say this to everyone I know, trophies and certificates you can print yourself. Trophies, you can go to any store, and probably for about 50 RON, you can make a trophy and put it on your shelf. So you could have 50 trophies up there, and that might look impressive. But what you're really trying to develop in these events is skills. And whilst it's nice to have that public approval, when someone's saying you're good or you're not good, I really do believe at the end of the day, even though we could only pick one person to go forward, don't let that defeat you in terms of who you are and where you're going. Don't walk out today thinking I wasn't good enough. Just think, those people didn't see the value in me today in the way that I feel that it was there. So, don't walk out the door thinking you weren't in the top 4 or 5. Walk out the door thinking, I was number 1, but just not in their eyes. Number 1 with work to be done so that maybe they need to see it. But I think you always need to have that confidence that actually that what you did was well. And you are in the final. So you got through your school round, you got through your regional round. There were 100 of you that were here yesterday, and only 10 of you made the final. So I think everyone here has qualities that show that you've got the ability to be a great public speaker. but maybe the journey is not finished for you. The last thing I'd like to do is just to say thank you to Ella, because she organises the and it's a bit harder for her to be here this year because she's now a proud mum. Yeah. So in every other version she was coming here as an individual, and now she's had to leave her daughter behind, so she's here. So thank you, Ella, and thank you for inviting me back, and good luck to everyone.
Okay. Right, so now I'm going to ask the help of our two volunteers. Just
two? Okay.
That's it. Okay. Let me hold that for you.
You gotta check that. Okay, so we are going to start in reverse order like we did yesterday, from certificate to participation to first prize, build up anticipation. What I would also like to ask is, because we're going to take a few photos at the end, to just stay on stage because it's going to make it easier so that you don't move back and forth, if that's okay. Okay, so first certificate of participation goes to Matei Kirila.
Congratulations. And one of this.
Yeah, you can just, and brace yourselves, you'll leave with muscles from here as well. We are also offering a certificate of participation to Daria Grecu. Congratulations, Daria.
Congratulations.
I would also like to invite Alexandra Cristina Bilanin to receive her certificate of participation. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
A certificate of participation also goes out to Luca Ștefan. Congratulations.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
Wait.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. We also have a certificate of participation for Marius Andrei Măginet. Well done. This is for you. And the last but not least, a certificate of participation for Alessia Miruna Gross. Okay. Honorable mention goes to Marc Matei.
Congrats. Congrats.
Thank you. Third prize goes to Tudor Ioan Hanganu. Okay, and to save two people from having a heart attack, which I see building here, second prize goes to Tudor Belliman. Very well done. It was actually a very close call. And first prize goes to Beatrice Polo. Oh, congrats.
Congratulations.
It's okay. You can be happy you won. You can be happy you won.
Also, a voucher from Irunet we have here, and 100% off from E-Center, and a Cambridge certificate. Okay? Congratulations to all.